Tonight, I'm going to share with you 3 true home invasion stories that will make you double-check your locks before going to bed. These accounts come from real people who experienced some of the most terrifying nights of their lives. The fear of someone breaking into your home while you sleep is primal and universal. But for these people, that fear became a living nightmare. Let's begin. Story 1. The sound in the kitchen. This first story comes from a woman named Sarah, who was 24 years old at the time and living alone in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon. Sarah worked as a nurse and often came home exhausted from long shifts at the hospital. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor of an older building, and she had always felt safe there. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly young professionals and elderly couples. She had lived there for almost 2 years without any problems. It was a Tuesday night in November when everything changed. Sarah had worked a double shift and didn't get home until nearly 1 a.m. She was so tired that she barely remembered locking the front door behind her. She kicked off her shoes, threw her keys on the kitchen counter, and headed straight to her bedroom. She fell asleep almost immediately, still wearing her scrubs. Around 3:30 in the morning, Sarah woke up to a sound. At first, she couldn't identify what had woken her. She lay in bed, listening to the silence, wondering if she had dreamed it. But then she heard it again. It was coming from the kitchen. A soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the tile floor. Sarah's heart began to race. She lived alone. There should be no sounds coming from her kitchen in the middle of the night. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand and turned on the flashlight. The apartment was dark, and she could see a sliver of light coming from under her bedroom door. But she was sure she had turned off all the lights when she went to bed. The scraping sound continued, followed by what sounded like cabinet doors opening and closing. Sarah's hands were shaking as she tried to think of what to do. She could call the police, but what if it was nothing? What if she was just hearing things? She had been working so many hours lately, maybe she was just paranoid. But then she heard footsteps. Deliberate, careful footsteps moving across her kitchen floor. Someone was definitely in her apartment. Sarah quietly slipped out of bed and crept toward her bedroom door. She pressed her ear against it, trying to hear more clearly. The footsteps had stopped, but she could hear what sounded like someone opening her refrigerator. Her mind raced. How had someone gotten in? She was sure she had locked the door. Maybe she forgot. No, she always locked it. It was automatic. Then she remembered something that made her blood run cold. Earlier that week, she had given her spare key to the maintenance guy so he could fix her leaky faucet. He was supposed to return it to the office when he was done, but what if he hadn't? What if he had made a copy? The footsteps started again, and this time they were moving toward the hallway, toward her bedroom. Sarah backed away from the door, her heart pounding so hard she was sure whoever was out there could hear it. She looked around her room frantically. There was no other way out. Her bedroom window led to a small balcony, but it was a 20-foot drop to the parking lot below. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. Sarah held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. She could see the shadow of feet under the door. Someone was standing there, just inches away from her. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The person just stood there. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She gripped her phone tightly, ready to call 911 if the door handle moved even slightly. Then, slowly, she heard the footsteps move away from the door. They went back toward the kitchen, then toward what sounded like the living room. Sarah knew she had to act. She couldn't just wait and hope the person would leave. She quietly opened her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Someone is in my apartment, Sarah whispered as quietly as she could. I'm locked in my bedroom. I can hear them moving around. Ma'am, can you speak up? I can barely hear you. I can't speak louder, Sarah breathed. They're right outside my room. Please send someone. The dispatcher took her address and assured her that officers were on their way. But it would take them at least 5 minutes to get there, and Sarah wasn't sure she could wait that long. The footsteps were moving again, and this time they seemed to be heading back toward the bedrooms. Sarah's apartment had 2 bedrooms, hers and a smaller one she used as an office. She heard the office door creak open. Then, after a moment, it closed again. The footsteps came back toward her bedroom door. This time, she saw the door handle slowly turn. Sarah bit her lip to keep from screaming. The handle turned all the way, but she had locked the bedroom door. The person on the other side pushed gently against it, testing it. Then came 3 soft knocks. "Sarah." A man's voice called quietly. "Sarah, are you awake?" The voice was familiar, but Sarah couldn't place it. It was calm, almost friendly, which somehow made it even more terrifying. "I know you're in there, Sarah. I can hear you breathing." Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth, trying to control her breathing. "How did he know her name?" "I've been watching you for a while," the voice continued. "You work such long hours. You must be so tired when you get home. You probably don't even remember giving me your key." And then Sarah remembered. The maintenance guy. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with dark hair and a thin build. She remembered thinking he had stared at her a little too long when she handed him the key. She remembered feeling uncomfortable when he commented on her work schedule, asking if she lived alone. "The police are coming," Sarah managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. There was silence on the other side of the door. Then she heard him chuckle softly. "No, they're not," he said. "You're just scared. But you don't need to be scared of me, Sarah. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." But Sarah could hear sirens in the distance now, getting closer. "Actually," the voice said, and she could hear the change in his tone. "Maybe they are coming." The footsteps moved quickly away from her door, back toward the kitchen. Sarah heard what sounded like her balcony door sliding open, then slamming shut. A few minutes later, she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway and authoritative voices calling out, "Police!" When the officers finally got Sarah's door open, they found her huddled in the corner of her bedroom, shaking uncontrollably. They searched the apartment and found that the man had indeed left through the balcony door. He had somehow climbed down the building and disappeared into the night. But here's the part that still gives Sarah nightmares. When the police were dusting for fingerprints, they found something that made her stomach drop. On her kitchen counter, next to where she had left her keys, was a small piece of paper with her work schedule written on it. Every shift, every day off, going back 3 weeks. He had been planning this for a long time, and he knew exactly when she would be home. The man was never caught. Sarah moved out of the apartment the next week and has never lived alone since. Story 2. The Family Trip. This second story comes from a man named David, who experienced something that changed his family's life forever. David lived in a suburb outside of Denver with his wife Linda and their 2 children, Emma, who was 8, and Jake, who was 6. They had what most people would consider a perfect life. David worked in IT, Linda was a teacher, and they had a beautiful house on a quiet street where all the neighbors knew each other. Every summer, David's family would take a 2-week vacation to visit Linda's parents in California. It was something they looked forward to all year, and the kids would talk about it for months in advance. This particular summer, they were supposed to leave on a Saturday morning. But on Friday afternoon, Jake came down with a terrible fever. Linda wanted to postpone the trip, but David's in-laws had already planned a big family reunion, and several relatives were flying in from out of state. They decided that Linda would stay home with Jake, and David would take Emma to California. They would join them in a few days once Jake was feeling better. So on Saturday morning, David and Emma loaded up the car and headed west. Linda kissed them goodbye and promised to call when Jake's fever broke. The drive to California was long but pleasant. Emma was excited to see her grandparents, and David enjoyed the father-daughter time. They stopped at roadside attractions and played car games. It felt like a mini-adventure. They arrived at Linda's parents' house Sunday evening, and Emma immediately ran into her grandmother's arms. David called Linda to let her know they had arrived safely. Jake was feeling a little better, but still had a low fever. Linda thought they might be able to join them by Wednesday. Monday and Tuesday passed normally. Emma played with her cousins. David helped his father-in-law with some projects around the house, and they all enjoyed big family dinners. Linda called each evening to update them on Jake's condition. Wednesday morning, David woke up to his phone buzzing. It was a text from Linda. "Jake much better today. Packing now. Should be there by dinner time. Can't wait to see you both." David showed the text to Emma, who was thrilled that her mom and little brother would be there soon. They spent the day preparing for Linda and Jake's arrival, and Linda's mother cooked Jake's favorite meal. But dinner time came and went with no sign of Linda and Jake. David tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. He assumed she was driving and her phone had died. It wouldn't be the first time. By 9 p.m., David was starting to worry. The drive from Denver should have taken about 8 hours, which meant they should have arrived by 6 p.m. at the latest. He called Linda's cell phone again. Still voicemail. Then he tried the house phone. It rang and rang with no answer. David's father-in-law suggested they call the police to check if there had been any accidents on the highway. The Colorado State Patrol said there had been no major accidents reported on the route Linda would have taken. By 11 p.m., David was in full panic mode. He called Linda's sister, who lived about 20 minutes from their house in Denver, and asked her to drive over and check on them. 30 minutes later, Linda's sister called back. Her voice was shaking. "David, you need to come home. Something's wrong." "What do you mean something's wrong? Are Linda and Jake okay?" "I'm at your house with the police. The front door was wide open when I got here. There are signs of a struggle in the living room." "David, they're gone." The next 12 hours were the longest of David's life. He arranged for Emma to stay with her grandparents and caught the first flight back to Denver. During the entire flight, his mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. When he arrived at his house, it was surrounded by police cars. Detective Morrison, who was leading the investigation, walked him through what they knew so far. The front door had been forced open, probably with a crowbar. There were clear signs of a struggle in the living room: an overturned coffee table, a broken lamp, and what looked like scratch marks on the hardwood floor. Linda's purse was still on the kitchen counter with her wallet inside, which ruled out robbery as a motive. But here's what made it even more disturbing. The suitcases that Linda had packed for the trip were neatly placed by the front door, as if she and Jake had been ready to leave when someone interrupted them. The neighbors hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door and usually noticed everything that happened on the street, said she had seen Linda loading the car around 2 p.m., but hadn't seen them actually leave. The detective asked David if Linda had any enemies, if she had been acting strange lately, if there had been any threatening phone calls or suspicious people around the house. David couldn't think of anything. Linda was an elementary school teacher. Everyone loved her. Days turned into weeks. The police followed every lead, but Linda and Jake seemed to have vanished without a trace. David barely slept, barely ate. He couldn't understand how someone could just disappear from a quiet suburban neighborhood in the middle of the afternoon. Then, 3 weeks after the disappearance, David received a phone call that made his blood run cold. "Hello, David." The voice was unfamiliar, but calm and controlled. "Who is this?" David demanded. "I think you know who this is. Or at least, you should know why I'm calling. Where are my wife and son?" "They're safe. For now. But whether they stay that way depends on you." David's hand was shaking as he gripped the phone. "What do you want?" "I want you to remember what you did 5 years ago. I want you to think about the Mitchell family." David's heart stopped. The Mitchell family. He hadn't heard that name in years, and he had tried so hard to forget what happened. 5 years ago, David had been working as a network security consultant. One of his clients was a small investment firm that turned out to be running a Ponzi scheme. When the FBI raided the offices, they found evidence on the company's servers that could have implicated several innocent employees. David was asked to provide testimony about the server security, but he was also asked to do something else. The FBI wanted him to delete certain files that would have cleared some of the employees but might have compromised their investigation into the bigger players. David was told that the employees would probably be fine, that they were small fish and wouldn't face serious charges. He was told that helping the FBI was the right thing to do. One of those employees was Robert Mitchell. Robert was a family man with 3 young children. When the investigation ended, Robert was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 12 years in prison. His family lost everything: their house, their savings, their future. Robert's wife had to move in with relatives. She couldn't find work because of the scandal. The children were bullied at school. Within 2 years, the stress had destroyed Robert's wife's health. She died of a heart attack at age 34. Robert's children went into foster care. "You remember now, don't you, David?" the voice on the phone said. I was just doing what the FBI asked me to do. I didn't know. You didn't know that your decision would destroy a family? You didn't know that 3 children would lose both their parents because you chose to delete files that would have proven their father's innocence. David felt sick. He had tried to convince himself over the years that he had done the right thing, that he was just following orders. But deep down, he knew he could have refused. He knew he could have found another way. "What do you want?" David whispered. "I want you to know what it feels like to lose your family. I want you to know what those children felt when their father was taken away for a crime he didn't commit." "Please," David begged. "My wife and son had nothing to do with what I did. Take me instead." "Oh, David, that's where you're wrong. See, I've been watching your family for a long time. I know how much you love them. Taking you wouldn't be nearly as satisfying as watching you live with the knowledge that they're gone because of what you did." The line went dead. David immediately called Detective Morrison and told him everything about the Mitchell case. The FBI got involved, and they began searching for any connection between Robert Mitchell and David's family's disappearance. What they found was chilling. Robert Mitchell had died in prison 2 years earlier, but he had a brother named Thomas. Thomas had been obsessed with getting revenge against everyone he blamed for his brother's death. He had spent years planning, watching, waiting for the perfect moment. Thomas had known about David's family vacation plans because he had been monitoring their communications for months. He knew that Linda would be staying behind with Jake, making them easy targets. But here's the part that still haunts David. When the police finally tracked down Thomas Mitchell, they found him in a remote cabin in the mountains. He was alone. Linda and Jake were never found. Thomas claimed he had never hurt them, that he had let them go after making his point. But no one believed him. The police searched the entire area around the cabin, brought in search dogs, even used ground-penetrating radar. There was no trace of Linda and Jake. Thomas Mitchell was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to life in prison. But he took the secret of what happened to David's family with him. He died of cancer 3 years later, never revealing where Linda and Jake were. David still lives in the same house, hoping that someday they'll walk through the front door. Emma, now a teenager, has tried to convince her father to move on, but he can't let go of the possibility that they might come home. Every year on the anniversary of their disappearance, David receives a single white rose in the mail with no return address. He has no idea who sends them or what they mean, but he knows that somewhere out there, someone else knows the truth about what happened to his family, and they're never going to tell him. Story 3. The House Sitter. This final story comes from a college student named Michael, and it involves a house-sitting job that turned into the most terrifying night of his life. Michael was a sophomore at the University of Wisconsin, and like most college students, he was always looking for ways to make extra money. When his professor, Dr. Henderson, asked if he would be interested in house-sitting for a weekend while she attended a conference, Michael jumped at the chance. Dr. Henderson lived in a beautiful Victorian house about 20 minutes from campus, and she was offering to pay him $200 for just 3 days of work. The job seemed simple enough. Dr. Henderson had 2 cats that needed to be fed, some plants that needed watering, and she wanted someone there to make sure the house looked occupied. She was particularly concerned about break-ins because there had been several in her neighborhood recently. Dr. Henderson left on a Thursday evening, and Michael arrived at the house around 8 p.m. She gave him a quick tour, showed him where everything was, and handed him a list of instructions. The house was gorgeous but old, with creaky floors and lots of dark wood. It was the kind of house that probably had a lot of history, and Michael couldn't help but wonder what stories its walls could tell. Thursday night passed without incident. Michael studied for his upcoming midterms, fed the cats, and watched Netflix. The house made normal old house noises, settling sounds, wind in the eaves, the occasional creak of floorboards. Nothing that bothered him. Friday was equally uneventful. Michael went to classes during the day and returned to the house in the evening. He ordered pizza, did some homework, and went to bed around midnight in the guest bedroom that Dr. Henderson had set up for him. It was Saturday night when things got weird. Michael had spent most of the day at the library studying, and he didn't get back to the house until almost 9 p.m. He noticed that the front porch light, which Dr. Henderson had specifically told him to keep on, was turned off. He thought maybe the bulb had burned out, but when he flipped the switch inside, it turned right on. Strange, but not alarming. Maybe there had been a power outage while he was gone. He fed the cats, heated up some leftover Chinese food, and settled in to watch a movie. Around 11 p.m., he started hearing sounds from upstairs. At first, it just sounded like the normal settling noises the old house made. But then he heard what distinctly sounded like footsteps in the hallway above the living room. Michael paused the movie and listened carefully. The footsteps moved from one end of the hallway to the other, then stopped. He told himself it was just the house settling, or maybe one of the cats. Dr. Henderson's cats were indoor cats, but maybe one of them had gotten upstairs somehow. But then he heard a door close. Michael's heart began to race. He was certain he had closed all the doors upstairs when Dr. Henderson showed him around on Thursday. And the cats weren't big enough to open and close doors. He grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and slowly made his way upstairs. The hallway was dark, and every door was closed, just as they had been when he arrived. He opened each one and checked inside. Dr. Henderson's bedroom, a spare bedroom, a bathroom, a storage room. All empty. But in Dr. Henderson's bedroom, something caught his attention. The window was open about 6 inches. Michael was sure it had been closed before. Dr. Henderson had specifically mentioned that she kept all the windows locked because of the break-ins in the neighborhood. Michael closed the window and locked it, then went back downstairs. He tried to convince himself that he had just overlooked the open window before, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. He tried to go back to watching his movie, but he couldn't concentrate. Every little sound the house made seemed amplified. He kept looking toward the staircase, expecting to see someone coming down. Around midnight, Michael decided to go to bed. But as he was brushing his teeth in the downstairs bathroom, he heard the footsteps again. This time, they were more deliberate, more purposeful. Michael turned off the water and listened. The footsteps moved across the upstairs hallway, then down the stairs. Someone was definitely in the house. Michael quietly opened the bathroom door and peered out into the living room. The house was dark except for the light from the bathroom behind him. He couldn't see anyone, but he could hear someone moving around in the kitchen. His mind raced. Should he confront whoever was there? Should he call the police? Should he try to get out of the house? Then he heard his name. Michael! A voice called softly from the kitchen. Michael, is that you? The voice was female, and for a moment Michael thought it might be Dr. Henderson. Maybe she had come back early from her conference. But something about the voice didn't sound quite right. It was too high, too sweet. Dr. Henderson? Michael called back, stepping out of the bathroom. Yes, it's me, the voice replied. I came back early. I'm in the kitchen. Michael walked toward the kitchen, but something made him stop before he got there. He couldn't put his finger on what was wrong, but every instinct he had was screaming at him to run. Dr. Henderson, he called again. Why didn't you call to let me know you were coming back? There was no response. Michael waited for several moments, then slowly crept toward the kitchen entrance. He peered around the corner and saw a figure standing with their back to him, looking out the window over the sink. The figure was wearing a dark coat and had shoulder-length blonde hair, similar to Dr. Henderson's. But something about the posture seemed wrong. The figure stood too stiffly, too unnaturally. Dr. Henderson, Michael said again, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure slowly turned around, and Michael's blood turned to ice. It wasn't Dr. Henderson. It was a woman he had never seen before, probably in her 40s, with stringy blonde hair and hollow, sunken eyes. She was smiling, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was wide and unnatural, showing too many teeth. Hello, Michael, she said in that same sweet voice. I've been waiting for you. Michael backed away from the kitchen entrance, his heart pounding. Who are you? How did you get in here? The woman took a step toward him, still wearing that horrible smile. I live here, Michael. This is my house. No, this is Dr. Henderson's house. You need to leave. I'm calling the police. Michael pulled out his phone, but the woman moved faster than he expected. She lunged forward and knocked the phone out of his hand. It skittered across the floor and disappeared under the couch. You don't need to call anyone, the woman said, her voice losing its sweet tone. We're going to have such a nice time together. Michael ran. He sprinted toward the front door, but when he grabbed the handle, it wouldn't turn. He yanked on it desperately, but it was locked, and he couldn't remember where Dr. Henderson had put the key. He ran to the back door, but it was the same situation. Locked, with no key in sight. Behind him, he could hear the woman's footsteps following slowly, deliberately. She wasn't in any hurry. She knew he was trapped. Michael ran upstairs, looking for another way out. He tried the window in Dr. Henderson's bedroom, but it was a 15-foot drop to the ground, and there was nothing to climb down on. "Michael," the woman's voice called from the bottom of the stairs. "Where are you going? We haven't finished talking." Michael locked himself in the bathroom and looked around frantically for anything he could use as a weapon. There was nothing except a toilet plunger and some towels. He could hear the woman coming up the stairs, her footsteps slow and measured. "I know you're scared, Michael," she called. "But you don't need to be. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk. I've been so lonely." The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. "I used to live in this house, you know," the woman continued. "A long time ago. Before that woman took it from me. Before she changed everything." Michael pressed his back against the bathroom door, trying to think of what to do. His phone was downstairs, the doors were locked, and he was trapped in a house with someone who was clearly unstable. "My family built this house in 1892, the woman went on. 5 generations of my family lived here. Until the bank took it away. Until that woman bought it and erased everything we were." The door handle turned. Michael had locked it, but he could hear the woman working on it with something. Maybe a bobby pin or a credit card. "I've been watching this house for years," she said as she worked. "Waiting for the right opportunity. When I saw that woman leave, and I saw you here all alone, I knew it was time." The lock clicked, and the door began to open. Michael threw his full weight against it, slamming it shut again. He reached for the lock, but the woman pushed back harder than he expected. She was stronger than she looked. "Michael," she said, and now her voice had turned cold and threatening. "Open this door right now, or I'm going to make this much worse for you." Michael looked around the bathroom desperately. There was a small window above the toilet, but it was barely big enough for him to fit through. Still, it was his only option. He climbed up onto the toilet and started working on the window latch. It was old and stiff, but it finally gave way. The window opened outward, and Michael could see that it led to a small roof over the back porch. Behind him, the woman was pushing harder against the door. He could hear her muttering to herself, but he couldn't make out the words. Michael squeezed through the window feet first and lowered himself onto the porch roof. From there, he could climb down the porch columns to the ground. He ran to the neighbor's house and pounded on the door until they woke up and called the police. When the officers arrived, they found the woman in Dr. Henderson's kitchen, calmly making herself a sandwich. She didn't resist arrest, and she didn't seem surprised that the police were there. Her name was Patricia Whitmore, and her story was both sad and disturbing. Her family had indeed lived in Dr. Henderson's house for several generations, but they had lost it to foreclosure in 1987. Patricia had never been able to accept the loss, and over the years, she had developed an obsession with getting the house back. She had been breaking into the house periodically for months, usually when Dr. Henderson was away. She knew Dr. Henderson's schedule, knew when she went out of town, and had been using those opportunities to live in the house for days at a time. The police found evidence that Patricia had been sleeping in the basement, had been eating Dr. Henderson's food, and had even been doing her laundry there. Dr. Henderson had noticed that things were slightly off sometimes. Food missing, clothes moved around, but she had attributed it to absent-mindedness. But here's the part that still gives Michael nightmares. When the police searched Patricia's apartment, they found detailed journals documenting not just Dr. Henderson's schedule, but Michael's as well. She had been watching him for weeks, learning his routines, planning for the night when she would have him alone in the house. The journals contained detailed fantasies about what she wanted to do to Michael, and they weren't pleasant. The police believe that if Michael hadn't escaped when he did, Patricia would have hurt him seriously. Patricia was found mentally unfit to stand trial and was committed to a psychiatric facility. But according to Michael, who kept in touch with Dr. Henderson after that night, Patricia escaped from the facility 2 years later. She was never recaptured. Dr. Henderson sold the house and moved to a different state. Michael changed schools and never took another house-sitting job. But sometimes, late at night, Michael gets phone calls with no one on the other end. Just breathing, and then the sound of a woman's voice whispering, "I'm still waiting for you, Michael." He's changed his phone number 4 times, but the calls always find him somehow. He doesn't know if it's really Patricia, or if it's just someone playing a cruel joke. But he's never stayed alone in a house since that night, and he probably never will again. These 3 stories remind us that our homes, the places where we should feel safest, can become the settings for our worst nightmares. Whether it's someone with a key they shouldn't have, someone seeking revenge for past wrongs, or someone who believes they have a right to be in your house, home invasions represent a violation that goes beyond theft or property damage. They shatter our sense of security in the most fundamental way. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories. And remember, always check your locks, never give out spare keys to people you don't completely trust, and if you ever feel like someone has been in your house when you weren't there, trust that instinct. Stay safe out there.